Welcome to The Connecting Place with Andrea Fabry, making the connection between health and your environment. Now, here's your host, Andrea Fabry.
Today we're going to talk about some of the latest research on the very popular over-the-counter medication, Tylenol, acetaminophen. I took Tylenol out of our medicine cabinet about 4 years ago after reading something about liver toxicity, and we were in a health crisis, so I just decided, I'm just not going to use it. After becoming more aware of some of the latest research, I'm glad I did. Now, we have with us today Dr. Ann Bauer, Children's Environmental Health Postdoctoral Research Fellow at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. She recently earned her doctorate in epidemiology from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, where her dissertation examined the developmental effects of analgesics with a special emphasis on acetaminophen, and I think you're going to hear some very enlightening things. Welcome to the program, Dr. Bauer.
Thank you for having me.
All right, help us out with the terminology. Tylenol, acetaminophen, there are other names for this, too.
Right. Most of the world is called paracetamol in Europe, but in the United States it's referred to generically as acetaminophen. The brand name is Tylenol in the United States. I guess the chemical name is N-acetyl para-aminophenol, but not many people refer to it as that.
And is that why I hear the term APAP?
It is.
Okay.
So APAP is an abbreviation that you'll read in the literature, but and short, it shortens it all up. But yes.
So we'll say acetaminophen, we'll say Tylenol, we might say APAP. How do you usually refer to it?
I will try and use acetaminophen. How about that?
Oh, it's acetaminophen?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Good. Well, all right. I'd love to hear your story. I mean, you were specializing, obviously, in environmental health in your education. How did you end up with this as your topic?
It really was just a lunchtime conversation with a couple of other young researchers. One of them was pregnant, and she was an older mother, and she was concerned about autism. And it was not anything I was researching at the time, but I spent the afternoon reading about autism. And that afternoon, I actually found a paper by Becker and Schultz, by Stephen Schultz and Kevin Becker, which highlighted the commonalities of asthma and autism, and then suggested that maybe acetaminophen was part of the equation. It was, as an epidemiologist, they were looking at trends and showing that the trends of acetaminophen sales followed the trends of autism in 5 different populations, and I found that compelling. And they put together a lot of the physiologic mechanisms, which at the time I really didn't understand. But I've been investigating now for, I think that was 5 years ago, ever since. And every time it's been kind of astonishing that every time I go and read something on the autism side, I can find parallels on the acetaminophen side. And so actually that was the early beginnings, but now other people have done some better research, some cohort studies, which are where you follow populations over in Europe, that are suggesting that in fact there are some neurologic effects of acetaminophen. But I don't think that's really what you wanted to focus on. Didn't you want to talk about general effects of acetaminophen?
Well, but it certainly plays into your story, a conversation with a pregnant mom. And we have a lot of moms listening who hear that and are concerned. So as far as I'm concerned, just hearing any of this is just enlightening that even there could be a connection. And obviously, it's very complex, the whole thing. I mean, you're not saying, this is definitely the one thing that causes autism, but...
No, I think the research is pointing to many factors are involved in many diseases, and certainly autism is one of those. So is it the only thing? Absolutely, I don't believe that. But could it be contributing? The evidence is suggesting that potentially it is. However, I don't think we're to a point where anyone can say anything definitive. But that being said, I think it's, I think maybe we should go back to what is truly known about acetaminophen.
Yes. Yes. What do we know? Because there are some things that we do know, and I don't think most people know.
Right. So the first thing about acetaminophen is we really started using it very heavily after there was a determination through epidemiology that Reye's syndrome was associated with the use of aspirin. So this created a shift around 1980 to the heavy use of acetaminophen. It was available prior to that, but people were skeptical about the toxicity of acetaminophen. But when we really did not think we should use aspirin in the pediatric population, it started the shift. And also there's been this shift that this is what pregnant women are allowed to use, versus there are very few. I think it's the only medication really that's generally allowed to be taken by pregnant women. But this toxicity issue is important. It is the last remaining coal tar derivative drug. All the others were phased out because of their toxicity. In 2009, there was an FDA panel looking at the toxicity issues where they actually decreased the adult dosages. But what the FDA panel said was that 25% above the therapeutic dose can cause toxicity in certain people. Particularly, the vulnerable people are people who, if you've been drinking, if you have been, if you're dehydrated or undernourished, which are all things that could happen when you might take acetaminophen when you're ill, So the safety margin is very slim on acetaminophen. And there's been a big push to this concept of know your dose because, in fact, they're very concerned about it's the leading cause of acute liver failure.
Acetaminophen is?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the leading cause of acute liver failure, yet and it has not really been tested in children nor in pregnant women. So the studies have shown about 65% of pregnant women will take it, and in any given week, 23% of infants are given acetaminophen.
Right.
Yes. There's a lot of exposure out there.
And now I remember being prescribed that for all my kids when they were young, first thing, or alternate between Motrin and acetaminophen or ibuprofen, Right. I just didn't think as a young mom what I was told, and I think we've learned in a lot of areas not to just, go with necessarily that.
Well, I mean, we consider pregnant women and children vulnerable populations, so that we do no drug testing in them. So, but then it's kind of counterintuitive. We then allow them to use some over-the-counter medications without really looking at long-term effects. So I think it's an interesting place where we are, yeah.
Very, and certainly your research is so timely. And you mentioned this quickly. It's the last coal tar derived over-the-counter medication. Is that right? Right.
I don't know the list of all of them, but over time they've been phased out because there have been concerns with the toxicity in the liver. So it's the only remaining one at this point.
And the other thing to point out, Dr. Bauer, is that we're talking not just about one medication, because you said the dose there's a very slim margin, 25%, you said, safety margin or therapeutic dose above. But I don't think most of us know that it's in lots of other medications that we could be taking together.
That's correct. There are 600 different combination medications available. So it's in many cold medicines. You hear a lot recently about this opioid crisis. The majority of opioids also contain acetaminophen, which, I don't think that the acetaminophen really contributes to the what is the word? I just lost it. That it really contributes to the people being the addiction. But I do think that the liver toxicity does come into play in the opioid crisis. So yes, it's very interesting. When I've been sick, because I've been doing this research, I tried to find a cold medication without acetaminophen, and it's very difficult.
And again, I just don't think we know about that safety margin. So sometimes they're mixed in there, and then we could go above and then harm the liver, and even the FDA would acknowledge this, right? I mean, this, again, we're talking about what is known. This is not speculation.
This is not. This is known. This has been an issue for a very long time. There's a nice ProPublica article from 2 years ago, which highlights how this has been known for over 20 years. And then there are a couple hundred deaths each year just from the liver toxicity, but it is the leading cause for hospitalizations for liver problems is acetaminophen. So it has its issues.
What else do we know? What else do we know? Since we're trying to stay with that, although again, I want to emphasize you've researched this so much. Right. I consider you to be one of the leading experts in this, but I know you want to stick with what is it we know. So we understand the liver toxicity. What else?
Right. So we know that it crosses the blood-brain barrier as well as the placenta. So it is reaching the brain. That's why. We also know that it is not an anti-inflammatory, which ibuprofen or naproxen or aspirin are all anti-inflammatories. They're NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Acetaminophen is not. As a matter of fact, what we know, what the research is beginning to show, is that in fact it can cause inflammation versus reduce inflammation. And then this leads to this reduction in glutathione, which is the body's natural detoxifier.
And that's known that it depletes glutathione?
Oh, yes. Yes, that's well known, and it does that.
Okay. We're almost out of time already.
Really?
Yeah. Can you discuss this study that about endocrine disrupting chemical mixtures and acetaminophen thrown in there, that study? Can you discuss that briefly?
Yes. So this study was done in rats, and it looked at 12 endocrine disrupting chemicals, both ones that affect estrogen and ones that are anti-androgenic, reducing testosterone. So it was a number of different types of. They were the list. I'm not going to try and read them to you, but they were things that we generally are studying as endocrine disruptors: plasticizers, pesticides. And what what these researchers did was this was all high doses given to rats. So they did a mixture of all of these chemicals all together and included acetaminophen in that mix. And they also did a mix of just acetaminophen, or it wasn't real mix, it was just acetaminophen. Mm-hmm. And what they found is when we're looking at how gene expression would change in the brains of these rats, and what areas of the brain it would affect, and how it would turn on and off the genes. And what they found is that the mixture with all the chemicals plus acetaminophen and just acetaminophen by itself had exerted almost the exact identical effect on the developing brain. And they concluded that acetaminophen had exerted an important influence. And they found that the genes that were, the expression changes were in genes related to autism and other developmental functions, but glutamatergic and GABAergic transmission and synapses in the brain. But essentially, these are what other researchers have identified as autism-related genes.
Well, this is all stunning information, I think, and as you mentioned, some of this has been out there for decades now, but I think it's starting to come together, and it's partly thanks to people like you, Dr. Bauer, who are putting your time and attention to this very important issue. I really appreciate you sharing it with our audience.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to do that. And I think it's important, even though the research may not be conclusive at this time, this is in many cases an optional medication. You obviously have to treat very high fever, but sometimes I think that people should consult their physician and proceed with caution, because we don't know exactly, but it doesn't look good.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
You've been listening to The Connecting Place, making the connection between health and your environment. Join us again next time for The Connecting Place with Andrea Faber.